Long ago, the prophet Isaiah foretold there would come a day when those from faraway lands, faraway countries, would flood into other nations. And that's exactly what's happening through the southern border of the United States of America right now. We're seeing that prophecy unfold, but it's not just Isaiah's prophecy. While encamped at Valley Forge, George Washington, it's reported he experienced 3 visions of America's future. The last one was that, again, there would be those from around the world flooding into the United States. And do you know what else? Both of them tell us what comes next. I'm your host, David Brennan. Yes, the prophet Isaiah, who foretold many things that would happen, many of which have already come to pass, also foretold that as the end times approach, those from faraway lands, faraway countries would flood into other countries, being destined to attack those who were foolish enough to allow them in. It's also reported that George Washington experienced a vision while at Valley Forge. Actually, 3 visions. It's the last of which, in which he says one of the biggest events that will happen to America is that there will be those from all across the world. He cites Asia, Africa, and Europe and the Middle East, flooding into the United States, destined to attack at some point. We're going to take a look at those prophecies. We're going to try to get to Washington's. We're going to cover Isaiah's first, because it applies so specifically to America today, and which means we're also seeing that America is in Bible prophecy. But first, it's necessary to appreciate that, in fact, armies, enemy armies are coming through the border, and don't take my word for it. We're going to look at what 10 former senior executive FBI agents had to say in a letter that was sent to Congress detailing the threat at the southern border. We're going to hear what other people say to get a full grip on exactly what's taking place. So when we do look at Isaiah's prophecy, we're going to see that it's actually, the stage is actually being set for that to unfold.
The invasion at the southern border is intentional and strategic and directly relates to Bible prophecy. United Nations NGOs, non-government organizations, are overseeing the invasion, having established processing camps in Central America to facilitate the flow of people into America. In what is a highly organized military-like processing system, mixed within the flood of people are literal armies of military age, single men, from hostile regions and countries, entering in massive numbers. Perhaps a military army of a few 100,000, representing what experts call a soft invasion, and the first military invasion of the United States since the year 1812.
We're going to look at that FBI letter sent by 10 former senior executives of the FBI in just a moment. But first, listen to what Gordon Chang had to say. Gordon Chang was on one of the many talk shows he's been on. He's a China expert. He's talking about what's coming across that border, and it's a real eye-opener.
Over 20 years. But the other issue, of course, is the border, as you've talked about, because across that border, we are seeing Chinese soldiers come across. And really what we're talking about is China putting together the infrastructure in the U.S. to attack the U.S. So clearly we've got to secure that border, or we're going to be fighting on our own soil.
Well, China expert Gordon Chang is ringing the alarm bells. He's telling us there is an actual Chinese army coming across that border. But this is not just happening in the United States. This is also happening in Western Europe, and it shows it's a globalist agenda. the globalist agenda is being implemented across Western Europe and within the United States. There's an army gathering, and it's not just a Chinese army, it's a Middle Eastern army as well. But he's not the only well-known person who's talking about this. President Trump at a campaign rally in 2024 spoke about it as well.
Think of it. They're coming in from China, 32,000 over the last few months, and they're all military age, and they mostly are men. And it sounds like to me, are they trying to build a little army in our country? Is that what they're trying to do?
President Trump and Gordon Chang are ringing the alarm bells, telling the American people there's a literal Chinese army entering the United States. Well, this fits perfectly with the prophecy of Isaiah in Isaiah 13, where those from faraway lands flood into other nations, that they are destined to attack. The stage is being set for the prophecy to be fulfilled. And we'll also try to get to George Washington's visions, but first Isaiah. But before we get to him, let's now look at what those 10 former senior executive FBI agents sent to Congress in a letter. Their warning is very specific and very dire.
As former senior executives of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, with deep experience combating dangers to the nation, we write to express our concern about a current, specific threat that may be one of the most pernicious ever to menace the United States. The danger arises from the nature of the threat itself. Wars and espionage and bombings and riots are sadly familiar delivery systems of instability, intimidation, and insecurity. The country has faced these and more throughout its history and has held together, though not without struggle.
These 10 former senior executives of the FBI say they've dealt with some of the greatest dangers America has ever faced, and they say this is one of the most pernicious dangers in our entire history. It's because the border being left wide open is allowing enemy armies to enter the United States. They're going to discuss that in detail. They're going to fall in line with what President Trump is saying, and Gordon Chang and others. And you're going to see how that is setting the stage for the fulfillment of Isaiah's prophecy once we get into his prophecy.
The threat we call out today is new and unfamiliar. In its modern history, the U.S. has never suffered an invasion of the homeland, and yet one is unfolding now. Military-aged men from across the globe, many from countries or regions not friendly to the United States, are landing in waves on our soil by the thousands, not by splashing ashore from a ship or parachuting from a plane, but rather by foot across a border that has been accurately advertised around the world as largely unprotected with ready access granted.
They point out that in its modern history, the United States has never suffered an invasion of the homeland, but yet, in their words, one is taking place now as military-age single males from hostile regions and countries are pouring into the United States across that southern border. Let's continue listening to what else they have to say.
It would be difficult to overstate the danger, represented by the presence inside our borders, of what is comparatively a multi-division army of young single adult males, from hostile nations and regions whose background, intent, or allegiance is completely unknown. They include individuals encountered by border officials and then possibly released into the country, along with a shockingly high estimate of gotaways, meaning those who have entered and evaded apprehension. In light of such a daunting, unprecedented penetration by uninvited foreign actors, it is reasonable to assert that the country possesses dramatically diminished national security at this time. The nation's military and laws and other natural protective barriers that have provided traditional security in the past have been thoroughly circumvented over the past 3 years.
What is their assessment? That a multi-division army has entered the United States. A multi-division army. A division consists of about 20,000 troops, and they believe there's a multi-division army now within the United States. But this is the thing. There's been so many millions of people that have crossed that border illegally. And the main demographic now is coming from hostile regions and nations. The Army could be huge.
In 2021, the demographics of those crossing the porous southern boundary started to shift. Young men from around the world traveling alone and holding questionable motivations dramatically increased in number to become the most common profile of those breaching the nation's borders. A startling number have been found on the terrorist watch list, or are from countries designated as state sponsors of terror, distinctly unfriendly to the United States.
They say the demographics of those coming in, flooding in across that open southern border, began to radically change only sometime in 2021 after President Trump left office. That's when it began to change. It shifted to those from countries and regions that are hostile to the United States, and it suddenly became young, single, military-age males instead of families from South and Central America. What's going on with that?
It is stark to say so, but having a large number of young males now within our borders who could begin attacking gatherings of unarmed citizens at the behest of a foreign terror group must be considered a distinct possibility. We would be remiss not to call out this potentially grave threat in the most direct terms. The warning lights are blinking. Any violation of the nation's immigration laws increases risks, but the surge in numbers of single military-aged males descending upon American cities and towns is alarming and perilous. Additionally, they are not just from terror-linked regions, but from China and Russia as well. Hostile adversaries of the U.S. with aspirations to devastate national infrastructure.
With so many of hostile individuals entering the United States, individuals hostile to the United States, they point out the danger, the vulnerability of gatherings of unarmed citizens in the United States. And in fact, you shouldn't have to be armed to be in the United States, but it looks like that may become the case because of what's being allowed to take place, this invasion at the southern border. And as we're going to see in a moment, this is fulfilling and setting the stage for the fulfillment of Isaiah's prophecy.
For these reasons, elements of this recent surge are likely no accident or coincidence. These men are potential operators in what appears to be an accelerated and strategic penetration, a soft invasion, designed to gain internal access to a country that cannot be invaded militarily in order to inflict catastrophic damage if and when the enemies deem it necessary. The new reality, this never-seen-before threat, deserves greater attention. The borders need to be secured against these young men, and those already here illegally must be identified and removed without delay. This will take the coordinated, cooperative efforts of the FBI, Department of Homeland Security, and the rest of the intelligence community to achieve. Knowing all of this, it would be a shameful travesty if some terrible attack, a preventable attack, were to occur against innocent Americans, or the infrastructure that keeps the nation safe and functioning.
They point out that this is not an accident. This is a strategic penetration of the United States by foreign armies, and it's a globalist agenda that's unfolding over the United States as though a globalist entity now controls the government of the United States and has ordered it to leave the southern border wide open. To fully appreciate Isaiah's prophecy, you have to have a basic understanding of time frames. This is very simple. The day of the Lord is the technical biblical term used for the end times. When we say end times, that's our popular way of saying the day of the Lord. There's a beginning to the end times, to the day of the Lord. It's depicted with a birth pangs statement. For example, in 1 Thessalonians 5, 1 through 3, Paul, in writing to the Thessalonians, says that the sudden beginning of the day of the Lord, the end times, is as travail upon a woman with child. It's birth pangs. Jesus, in Matthew 24, the Olivet Discourse, He's talking about in verse 7 about these horrific events. Nation will rise against nation, kingdom against kingdom. There'll be famine and pestilences everywhere. There'll be these mega earthquakes everywhere. Luke's rendition says they're mega, all over the earth. And he says, this is the beginning of sorrows. Well, the same word, Greek word, is used for beginning of sorrows, odin, as it's used for birth pangs. Birth pangs are the beginning. It's used interchangeably. So when we go over Isaiah's prophecy, he's going to identify these masses of people coming in from faraway lands, coming into the nations that they're destined to attack, as occurring during the day of the Lord. So you know right there it's during the end times. And he's going to stipulate that it's at the beginning of the end times by using that birth pangs phrase. So we know the armies have to gather within these nations before the day of the Lord, the end times launch, which in itself is very interesting because it shows the end times are probably getting very close to unfolding, and it also shows that the United States is in Bible prophecy. At the beginning of Isaiah 13, he starts off by talking about ancient Babylon. But don't be thrown off by that. It's a comparison to events that took place long ago in ancient Babylon, but then by verse 4, he shifts over and begins talking about events during the end times. And right in the beginning of those verses, he talks about how these armies that are gathering within nations from faraway lands, which we're going to see that he tells us they come from faraway lands, faraway countries, that they are hiding in the mountains within these countries. They're not literally in mountains. These mountains are used to symbolically depict a hiding place. In other words, the people don't know. The people in these countries who are going to be attacked by these foreign armies that are gathering don't know that they have armies within their country. They're hiding in the proverbial mountains.
They come from a far country, from the end of heaven, the Lord and his weapons of indignation, to destroy the whole land.
Isaiah tells us they come from a far country. Some versions say they come from a faraway land. Sure, Africa, Asia, the Middle East, and even Europe. They're coming from faraway places into the United States through the open southern border, setting the stage for the rest of Isaiah's prophecy to fulfill.
Wail, for the day of the Lord is at hand. It will come as destruction from the Almighty. Therefore all hands will be limp, every man's heart will melt.
Isaiah just told us when this takes place. It's at the day of the Lord. That's the end times. But the end times, the day of the Lord, lasts for a period of years. So we need to know more precisely when during the end times does it take place, and he supplies that information in the very next verse.
And they will be afraid. Pangs and sorrows will take hold of them. They will be in pain as a woman in childbirth. They will be amazed at one another. Their faces will be like flames.
Isaiah uses a birth pangs phrase to identify it's at the beginning of the end times that these armies will attack the nations they came within. So obviously, before the end times launch, these armies have to gather within the nations, and we're seeing that happen right now because of the southern border being left wide open. It's part of a globalist agenda. And the same thing is taking place in Western Europe. They're setting the stage for the launch of Isaiah 13's prophecy to take place.
It shall be as the hunted gazelle, and as a sheep that no man takes up. Every man will turn to his own people, and everyone will flee to his own land. Isaiah 13:14.
Isaiah's prophecy is wide-ranging. He talks about them gathering in the mountains, hiding within countries. Then he talks about there's going to be an attack. Now he talks about how those who did come into the countries and attack the people of the countries have to flee back to their own lands. And that indicates at some point America will be victorious and be set free from the attackers who are building up within our country right now. The sword of David is here to supply information. That's what we're about, to make certain you are fully armed with a knowledge of events that are unfolding and how they impact you and your family and how they relate to Bible prophecy. We've got some resources that go in depth on the issues that we're discussing today that you would find very helpful in gaining a full understanding of exactly what is taking place at this important time.
Never in history has a nation allowed itself to be invaded. 10 years ago, nobody would have believed this could happen. Yet, it is unfolding before the eyes of America as people try to understand why. The answer is Bible prophecy. As a multitude of prophecies are lining up, few observers of the times appear to realize that the cross-border invasion of nations is part of end-time prophecy. According to the prophet Isaiah, the gathering of people from faraway lands into countries they are destined to attack happens just before the end times launch. Then, Isaiah goes on to describe the coming attack in vivid detail. The Isaiah 13 invasion of America, a short but powerful resource, presents evidence that America must now be considered as part of Isaiah's prophecy. The prophet also identifies the prophetic time frame wherein the attack begins. For a gift of $30, which includes the book, the DVD, and the cost of shipping, this important resource brings prophetic clarity as to why the invasion is happening. Although her greatest battle now approaches, Isaiah and another prophet infer ultimate victory for America. Yes, America is in Bible prophecy based on what is now unfolding. To appreciate the full magnitude of what is happening at the border, we are also offering an additional resource. Invaded by J.J. Carroll, a former U.S. Border Patrol agent, whose first-hand observations places the growing threat in proper perspective. Together, this combination of resources is available for a gift of $45, which includes the cost of shipping. The events at the southern border have clarified end-time prophecy, representing an important piece of that puzzle. But it is still only one part of a much bigger picture. A broader perspective on prophecy must include the worldwide entity ultimately behind the invasion, as well as many other events, especially COVID-19, which had the fingerprints of a dark entity all over it. For a greater understanding of the bigger picture, we are offering another resource, The Sixth King, which looks at a massively powerful worldwide entity that now controls nations from within. A kingdom that fulfills Daniel's prophecy that the Antichrist kingdom will be different from all kingdoms before it. It identifies the signs that the Antichrist is on the scene and actively engaged. Those with ears to hear know there is a worldwide entity, with massive power, driving nations in a dark direction. The Isaiah 13 Invasion of America, book and DVD, Invaded, by J.J. Carroll, and The Sixth King, are vital resources in understanding the developing prophetic scene and its impact on America. All four resources are an $80 value available in this special offer for only a $60 gift, which includes the cost of shipping. This end-time resource package is now available at the ministry website, swordofdavid.tv, or by calling the toll-free number on the screen which spells, My Sword. 833, My Sword.
Isn't that amazing? Over 2,500 years ago, the prophet Isaiah foretold there would be a day when those from faraway lands would come flooding into other countries and that eventually they would attack. How unusual is it that we're being told by experts that as this deluge of individuals coming through the wide open southern border of the United States, that within them are military armies. Gordon Chang, who's an expert on China, is identifying this as a Chinese invasion. They're sending young military-age males, single males, into the United States in large numbers. And one thing to remember, China is a closed society. They don't just let people out. They have to get the approval of the government So this is the Chinese Communist government sending an army into the United States. But it's not just China. These hostile regions and nations are sending a multitude of young, single, military-age men into the United States through the wide open southern border. What better way to invade the United States? Instead of confronting our powerful military, they simply come across that border. But the border being left wide open is telling us something else. The United States is ruled right now by a globalist government, a government not looking at what is the interest of the American people, because clearly endangering the American people by allowing armies within the country. And how many terrorists is anyone's guess. It's got to be a massive number that have come through that border. But no government dedicated to protecting its own nation, if that's the top priority, would allow this to happen. We have to come to the realization that something else much bigger is at play here. Some of the resources that we offer, like the Sixth King, takes a hard look at this globalist entity and whether or not it's the biblical beast kingdom, because what's significant is that the prophet Daniel said, at the time the biblical beast kingdom will exist on the earth, it will be different from all kingdoms before it. What we have today in this entity, this worldwide entity that many people are fully aware exists, very powerful entity. Some people call it the New World Order. Whatever you call it by, this entity has been usurping the sovereignty of nations from within. And that's clear. We've seen it in Western Europe, where they've left their borders wide open to be fully invaded. And we've also seen it in the United States, where we've had 10 to 12 million since 2021 to 2024. And the complexion, the makeup of those individuals has changed radically to those from hostile nations and regions. So we don't have time to go over Washington's vision, where he also he was given visions, and he also saw that at some point the United States, these people from around the world would flood into the United States, ultimately to make war against the people of the United States. And his prophecy dovetails perfectly with what Isaiah says. It's really an amazing prophecy. But in closing, let me just say that if you have not accepted Jesus Christ as your Savior yet, it's never too late. Even on your deathbed, you can accept Jesus Christ as your Savior. As the times evolve, it's something that if you have not done so, is really the time to do so is now. And we'll be back next week, and we'll cover Washington's vision at that point. God bless.